At the family meeting after my dad's funeral, my mom slid me a thick envelope and said, "There's nothing for you." But one detail didn't fit, and the way they guarded that paperwork felt rehearsed. So I drove to the courthouse, pulled the file, and found a contradiction that changed everything. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life I've been the kind of guy who keeps his head down, does his work, pays his bills, and tries not to ask anyone for anything. I live outside Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm not rich. I'm not struggling either. I work in IT support for a mid-sized medical billing company. Steady paycheck, decent benefits, nothing glamorous. The kind of job where you get praised when everything is invisible, and you get blamed when someone's printer stops working because they unplugged it to charge their phone. I'm telling you all this because what happened after my dad died wasn't some movie plot to me. It wasn't family drama content. It was my real life being pulled apart in front of me by people who were supposed to love me. My dad's name was Robert. He was 67 when he passed. Not ancient, not young. Just old enough that everyone tells you to be prepared, and young enough that you still feel cheated when the call comes. He died on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I still remember that detail because I'd been half awake about to roll out of bed when my phone started vibrating like a fire alarm on the nightstand. I saw my sister's name, Claire, and my first thought wasn't even that something was wrong. It was, why is she calling this early? Claire doesn't call early unless she wants something. When I picked up, her voice was too controlled, too neat, like she'd already had time to arrange her words. "It's Dad," she said. "He's gone." A few seconds after that, my mother got on the line. My mom, Diane, sounded like she was reading a statement. She kept saying we did everything we could, and he didn't suffer. I'm sure those things were meant to be comforting, but they felt like lines in a script that wasn't written for me. I drove to their house in a fog. I remember the highway signs, the sunlight on my windshield, the way my hands tightened on the steering wheel whenever my mind tried to picture Dad's face. I kept thinking the same stupid thought. I should have come last weekend. I should have come earlier. I should have. There's always a should have after someone dies. Our family has never been close in the warm, easy way people talk about. We were the kind of family that gathered for holidays, took pictures, smiled, and then quietly returned to our separate corners of life. My parents stayed married, but it wasn't a fairy tale. It was more like a business partnership where Dad did the quiet labor, fixing things, paying things, handling the boring responsibilities, and Mom did the social part. Claire took after Mom. Then there was me. I was the reliable one. That's what people say when you're useful but not celebrated. Reliable. The one you can call to move a couch, to fix a laptop, to drive someone to the airport at 4 a.m. The one who gets thanked, but never chosen first. Claire was chosen first. She's 41 now, the older sibling. She's polished, confident, and always knows how to sound like she's being reasonable even when she's twisting a knife. She married well. Mark, a sales manager who loves being the loudest person in any room. They have 2 kids, a big house, a dog they treat like a third child, and the kind of curated life that makes people assume they must be happy. I showed up at my parents' place, and the house looked the same as always. Trimmed hedges, porch light on, 2 cars in the driveway. Everything perfectly normal, like the world hadn't cracked open. Inside, it was all quiet movement. Relatives in low voices, the smell of coffee no one was drinking. My mom in a black blouse, sitting too straight on the couch, greeting people like a host. Claire near the kitchen, holding court. When she saw me, she gave me a quick hug, patting my back twice like I was a coworker. "I'm glad you made it," she said. And then immediately, "We're handling everything." That sentence landed wrong, but I let it pass because grief does strange things. Sometimes you cling to whatever structure someone offers, even if it's built out of control and superiority. I went down the hallway to my dad's room. The door was half open. His slippers were still by the bed, his reading glasses on the dresser. And that's when it hit me in a way the phone call hadn't. My dad was really gone. I stood there staring at the small details that made up his life, and something inside me felt thin and exposed. Dad and I weren't best friends, but we had our own quiet understanding. He was the person who taught me how to change a tire without panicking, how to keep receipts, how to listen more than I talk. When I was a kid and Mom and Claire were in one of their moods, Dad would come into my room at night and sit at the edge of the bed and ask, "You okay, kiddo?" Like it mattered. And it did matter. The funeral happened fast. My family likes speed when speed prevents questions. The service was in a modest chapel with beige carpet and rows of chairs that squeaked. People spoke about Dad like he was a steady presence, a good man, Hard-working, dependable. All true. But there was this strange gap between the dad they were describing and the dad I knew. Like they were describing a tool that had broken, not a person we had loved. After the burial, we went back to the house for food and awkward small talk. Everyone kept looking at my mom, waiting for her cues, and she performed grief in a way that seemed efficient. Claire floated around, checking on everything, collecting sympathy like it was a currency. At one point, Mark came up to me with a plastic plate of ham and potato salad and said, "Hey man, tough deal. But look, your mom and Claire have it all under control. The estate stuff, the paperwork, that's stressful. Not everyone can handle it." It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder of my place. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. I just nodded and said, "Yeah." In the days after the funeral, I tried to help. I offered to call the bank. I offered to sort through Dad's papers. I offered to sit with my mom, to keep her company. But every time, my mom and Claire brushed me off. "We've got it. It's handled. You don't need to worry." The first time I felt something truly off was about 2 weeks later, when I stopped by and found Claire at the dining table with a binder, stacks of documents, and my dad's old laptop open. She looked up at me like I'd walked into a meeting I wasn't invited to. "Oh," she said, and her tone was too light. "Did you need something?" "I was going to ask if you guys found the life insurance paperwork," I said. "Dad mentioned he had a policy through work years ago. I don't know if it's still active." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's all part of the estate process," she said. "Mom is beneficiary on whatever there is." "Whatever there is," I repeated. "So there is something." She exchanged a glance with my mom, who was in the kitchen pretending not to listen. My mom came out wiping her hands on a dish towel like she'd been summoned. "Ethan," she said, "your father didn't have much, you know that." That was the first lie. Not a huge lie, but a strategic one. My dad wasn't wealthy, but he was careful. He'd worked for decades. He owned the house with my mom. There were retirement accounts, tools, vehicles, personal property. Maybe not enough for yachts and vacation homes, but enough that didn't have much was an insult to his life. I said, "He owned this house. It's in my name too," my mom snapped, sharper than I expected. Then she softened instantly, like she'd caught herself. "And anyway, it's not something you need to get involved in. It's complicated." That word again, complicated. Complicated is what people say when they want you to stop asking simple questions. I didn't push. I regret that now, but at the time I was still trying to keep the peace. I'd grown up learning that if I made things harder, I'd be blamed for starting something. So I swallowed my concerns and went back to my life. A month passed, then another. I heard almost nothing about the estate except small comments that didn't add up. My mom mentioned in passing that she'd been meeting with the attorney. Claire posted a photo on social media of her kids at a fancy restaurant with the caption, "Celebrating new beginnings." It might have been unrelated, but the timing made my stomach tighten. Then about 3 months after Dad died, I got invited, if you can call it that, to what my mom called a family meeting. It was at her house on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have felt calm. When I arrived, Mark's truck was already there. Claire's SUV too. I walked in and immediately felt like the air had been set. My mom sat at the dining table, Claire beside her. Neat hair, neat blouse. Mark leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed like security. There was an envelope on the table. Thick, official looking. My mom tapped it with her finger and said, "We've finalized everything." I sat down slowly. "Everything?" Claire slid the envelope toward me like she was handing me my portion of a bill. "It's done," she said. "Dad's estate, the probate filing, the assets, all of it." I stared at the envelope and then at them. "So what happens now?" My mom exhaled dramatically, like I was exhausting her by existing. "Ethan," she said, "your father's wishes were very clear." My throat tightened. "Okay." Claire leaned forward, voice smooth. "There's nothing for you." At first I didn't understand what she meant. My brain tried to interpret it in the least painful way. "Nothing like, nothing specific?" I asked. "I mean, I'm not trying to take Mom's house. I'm not." Mark snorted, and Claire shot him a look that said, "Let me handle this." My mom said, "Your father left everything to me, and what will eventually go to Claire will go to Claire." That sentence was structured like a law of nature, like it was obvious, like I was ridiculous for being surprised. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "Dad told me. He told me he wanted things to be fair." Claire's smile sharpened. "People say a lot of things, Ethan." I reached for the envelope. My mom put her hand on it before I could grab it. It's just paperwork, she said. You don't need to read it, it's legal language. The attorney explained it. That was the moment something in me changed, not into anger, not into shouting, into a cold awareness. Because if there was truly nothing for me, why was there an envelope at all? I looked at my mom's hand on the paper. Let me see. My mom's eyes narrowed. Why? So you can argue? So you can create drama when we're still grieving? Claire jumped in immediately, voice sweet, poisonous. Mom has been through enough. Don't do this. Mark added, look, man, this isn't about feelings, it's business. And business is done. Business. My dad's life reduced to business. I sat back, staring at them. I felt a kind of humiliation I'd never experienced as an adult, because it wasn't just private, it was a coordinated effort. They weren't simply telling me the outcome, they were teaching me my position. I said carefully, are you saying Dad wrote a will and it leaves me nothing? My mom's mouth tightened. Yes. Claire nodded like she was validating the truth. Yes, and honestly it makes sense. You don't have kids. You're fine. I have a family. Mom needs security. Dad knew that. I couldn't breathe right for a second. Not because I needed the money. Not because I was planning to cash out some inheritance and buy a sports car. But because they were rewriting my relationship with my father in front of me. They were telling me that the man who had checked on me when I was a quiet, anxious kid had looked at his own son at the end of his life and decided nothing. And then they had the nerve to frame it as logical. Dad wouldn't do that, I said, but it came out weaker than I wanted. My mom's eyes flashed. Do not tell me what your father would or wouldn't do. I was his wife, Claire added, and I was the one who actually helped them. I drove Mom to appointments. I handled bills. Where were you? That question was designed to shame me, and it worked for a second, until I realized what she was doing. She wasn't proving Dad's intentions. She was justifying a result. I stood up, chair scraping the floor. My hands were shaking and I hated that they could see it. I want a copy, I said, of the will, the probate filing, something. My mom stood too, mirroring me like a challenge. You're not entitled to anything. I'm his son, I said, and my voice cracked on the word son. I hated that too. Mark stepped forward slightly, not touching me, but close enough to be a message. Claire said, Ethan, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. That's what sealed it. Not the words nothing for you. Not even the implication that my father had cut me out. It was the confidence, the comfort they had in humiliating me. Like they'd rehearsed. I left without the envelope. I left without shouting. I drove home and sat in my apartment parking lot with the engine off, staring at my steering wheel until the sun went down. For days I went through my life like I was wearing someone else's skin. I answered emails at work. I fixed problems. I made small talk. And underneath it all, my mind kept returning to that table, that envelope, my mother's hand pressing down on it like she could physically keep the truth from me. I kept asking myself two questions that wouldn't go away. First, did my dad really leave me nothing? Second, if he did, why did my family look so relieved when they told me? By the end of that week, grief had turned into something harder. Not rage, not revenge, something quieter and more focused, a need to know. Because if my father truly wanted me cut out, I needed to accept it and move on. But if someone was lying, if someone had used my dad's death as a chance to erase me, then I couldn't just swallow it like I always had. And that was the problem. I suddenly found myself trapped inside. My family had declared the story was finished. They'd told me to my face that Dad left me nothing, and they wanted me to disappear quietly. But I knew enough about probate to understand one thing. If there was a case, there was a file. And if there was a file, there was a paper trail. So I decided I was going to find out what was really in it, whether my family liked it or not. On Monday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my dad's name written on a yellow legal pad like it was a problem I could solve with enough effort. I didn't know everything about probate, but I knew this. When someone dies with property, there's a public process. There are filings, case numbers, notices, an executor or personal representative, an inventory, a list of assets, debts, distributions, and most importantly, in a lot of cases, at least part of it becomes accessible through the county clerk. If my family was telling the truth, the paperwork would match their story. If they were lying, the paperwork would have gaps. I started with what I could do without anyone's permission. I searched online for Wake County probate records in estate case search. The county site looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. After a few dead links and confusing menus, I found an e-filing portal that required a case number. Of course it did. I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called again later in the afternoon, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Mom, I need the probate case number for Dad's estate. Please send it." No reply. That alone told me something. If there was nothing wrong, giving me a case number wouldn't matter. A case number isn't money. It isn't a key. It's just a reference. The fact that she wouldn't even give me that made my stomach tighten. So the next day I did the thing I'd been avoiding because it felt too official, too confrontational, too final. I drove to the courthouse. Wake County's courthouse is the kind of building that makes you feel small the second you walk in. High ceilings, polished floors, metal detectors, and that faint smell of paper and disinfectant. People were lined up at various windows holding folders like their whole lives were inside them. I stood there for a moment feeling stupidly nervous, like someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "You don't belong here." Then I reminded myself, my dad is dead. I'm his son. If anyone belongs here, I do. I approached the clerk's counter for estates, and when it was my turn, I said, "Hi, I'm trying to look up the probate file for my father's estate. His name is Robert Caldwell." The clerk, a woman who looked like she'd seen every kind of family conflict possible, asked for his date of death. I gave it. She typed, clicked, frowned slightly, then typed again. "Here it is," she said, and slid a small slip of paper toward me with a case number printed on it. Just like that. No drama, no lecture, no moral judgment. A simple number my own mother had acted like was classified information. The clerk said, "Do you want to view the file, or do you want copies?" I swallowed. "View first, please." She pointed me to a row of computers. "You can access the scanned documents there. If you need paper copies, come back with the document list." I sat at the computer, hands hovering over the keyboard, and typed in the case number. The screen loaded a list of documents: petition for probate, letters of administration, oath of personal representative, notice to creditors. Seeing those words felt like reading another language and still understanding exactly what was being said. My mom, Diane Caldwell, was listed as the personal representative. Not shocking, but what hit me was the date. The petition had been filed less than 2 weeks after my dad died. So when my mom and Claire were acting like everything was still complicated and still being handled, they weren't overwhelmed. They were already moving quickly and quietly. I clicked the petition first. It stated my dad died intestate. No will. I blinked, then clicked again, thinking I misread. Intestate. No valid will submitted to the court. But my mother had looked me in the face and said, "Your father's wishes were clear." Claire had said, "Dad wrote a will, and it leaves you nothing." And here in a legal filing they were telling the court he had no will at all. My throat went dry. I scrolled down to where it listed heirs. It named Diane, spouse. Then it listed children, Claire Dawson and Ethan Caldwell. Both of us, equal category, equal standing as heirs under the default rules. My heart started pounding, not with joy, but with the sick realization that I wasn't crazy. They had lied, or at least they were telling different stories depending on who was listening. I clicked through more pages, trying to slow down my thoughts enough to read carefully. There were forms with checkboxes about assets, estimated value ranges. There were signatures, notary stamps. Everything felt cold and procedural, but underneath it I could feel my dad's absence like a weight. Then I saw the part that made my hands clench into fists under the desk. There was a section for interested persons notified. I wasn't listed as having been formally served at my address. There was an address next to my name, but it was wrong, an old apartment I'd moved out of years ago. I stared at it, the wrong address sitting there like a casual mistake, but I knew my mother had my correct address. She mailed my Christmas card there last year. Claire had sent birthday gifts to my place, so why use the old address? Because if official notices went to the wrong place, I wouldn't show up, I wouldn't respond. Deadlines would pass, the estate could move forward without me. That's when the humiliation from that Sunday meeting changed shape into something sharper. It wasn't just emotional cruelty. It was strategy. I printed a few pages, the petition, the heirs section, and the page showing my wrong address. I didn't know what I would do with them yet, but I needed them in my hands, proof that I wasn't imagining things. Back in my car, I sat for a moment before turning the key, staring at the courthouse doors through the windshield. My dad's death had given my family an opportunity, and they were treating it like a project. That night, I called a probate attorney, not because I wanted to sue my mother, Not because I was ready to burn everything down, but because I needed someone who spoke this language to tell me what I was looking at. I found a small firm with decent reviews and booked a consultation. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet office across from a man named Daniel Su, who looked like he'd spent his entire career watching people try to pretend money doesn't change families. He listened while I explained. I kept it factual. Dad died. Family says I get nothing. Probate filing says intestate. Wrong address. No notice. Daniel didn't look surprised. That scared me more than anything. He said when there's no will filed, the estate is distributed according to intestacy laws. In North Carolina, the spouse and children share, but the exact split depends on the size and type of assets. So I'm entitled to something, I said. In an intestate estate, yes, he said carefully. But entitlement on paper and what actually happens can differ if you're not participating, if assets are handled informally, or if you miss deadlines. I slid the printed page with the wrong address across to him. Is that a big deal? He adjusted his glasses and looked at it. It can be. Notice requirements matter. But I'm going to be blunt. Proving deliberate misconduct is harder than proving something feels wrong. We'd need a pattern. We'd need documentation. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. So what do I do? Daniel leaned back. First we gather information. Full document set. Then we see what's missing. The inventory is a key piece. The estate can't be properly administered without it. The inventory, I repeated. Yes, he said. It's a sworn list of assets, bank accounts, real estate, vehicles, personal property above a threshold. It can be amended. It can be incomplete at first, but it's one of the clearest windows into what's really there. I nodded slowly. My family told me Dad didn't have much. Daniel gave me a look that said he'd heard that exact line 1,000 times. People say that when they don't want other people looking. He explained the basics, how the personal representative has duties, how heirs can request accountings, how some assets pass outside probate like joint accounts or named beneficiaries. Then he said something that stuck in my chest like a hook. Your father may have had assets that weren't obvious, he said, or assets that someone doesn't want categorized as part of the estate. Like what? I asked. Small business interests, a safe deposit box, a second vehicle, a personal checking account that wasn't joint, tools, collectibles. Even a single item can matter if it's tied to a larger plan. A single item. I didn't know it then, but that phrase would come back later in a way that made my blood run cold. Before I left, Daniel told me, if you want me to formally represent you, we can do that. But even without that, you can start by pulling every filing from the clerk and keeping a timeline. Watch for the inventory, watch for amendments, and don't communicate with your family only by phone. If things escalate, you want written records. I drove home with my head buzzing, feeling like I'd stepped into a version of adulthood no one prepares you for, the part where your family becomes an adversary, and you still have to go to work the next day like it's normal. That evening, my mom finally texted back. Why are you digging into this? Claire and I told you everything. Please stop. No case number, no explanation, just an order. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. Then I typed, the probate filing says Dad died without a will. It also lists my old address. I want this handled correctly. Please email me the attorney's contact. A few minutes later, Claire replied instead of my mom. Ethan, you're being paranoid. Dad didn't want drama. Mom is devastated. If you keep pushing this, you're going to destroy what's left of the family. That message was so perfectly crafted it almost impressed me. It didn't address the facts. It framed me as the problem. It put the burden of family peace on the person being excluded. I replied with one sentence, I'm not asking for a fight, I'm asking for the truth. No answer after that. Over the next couple weeks I did what Daniel suggested. I became boringly methodical. I pulled every document from the file. I organized them in a folder on my computer. I made a timeline, date of death, filing date, appointment of personal representative, notice publication. I also started keeping a log of every interaction with my family, texts, missed calls, emails. I didn't respond emotionally. I responded like someone building a record. And as I read and reread the probate documents, more small inconsistencies started popping out. The estimated value of the estate seemed too low, especially considering my dad's truck, the house, and what I knew about his retirement account from casual conversations over the years. The filing listed personal property minimal, which didn't make sense if you'd ever stepped into my dad's garage. That garage had thousands of dollars worth of tools, organized, maintained, labeled, My dad didn't buy junk. He bought things once and kept them forever. But the biggest thing, the thing that made me feel like I was watching a magic trick in slow motion, was how little there was in the file about actual assets. No inventory yet, no detailed list, just vague estimates. It was like my dad's life had been boiled down into a couple of checkboxes and a shrug. 3 weeks after my courthouse visit, I decided to do something I hadn't done since the funeral. I went back to my mom's house. Not to plead, not to argue, to look. I didn't tell her I was coming. I showed up on a Saturday morning and knocked. My mom opened the door and her face immediately hardened like she'd been caught with something in her hands. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I want to see Dad's things," I said. "I want a few personal items. Photos, maybe one of his watches, something." Her eyes flicked over my shoulder like she expected someone else to be with me. "That's not a good idea," she said. "Why?" I asked. "He's my father." Claire's voice came from inside before I even saw her. "Because you're going to use it as an excuse to snoop." Claire appeared in the hallway, arms folded. Mark stood behind her like a shadow. I said, "I'm not here for paperwork today. I'm here because I miss my dad, and because you can't just erase me from his life." My mom looked away. For a split second I saw something in her expression, fear, maybe, or guilt. Then it vanished. She said, "You can take a photo album. That's it." Claire added, "And you're not going into the office or the garage." That hit me instantly. The office or the garage. The two places my dad kept anything important. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept the terms, but my mind was already filing it away. If they were so confident I got nothing, why guard those rooms like they were vaults? My mom handed me a thin album from a shelf. I flipped through it while they watched me like I was a thief. There were pictures of Claire's graduation, Claire's wedding, Claire's kids, family vacations where I looked like an extra, standing slightly apart, smiling because the camera was there. Then I reached a photo I hadn't seen in years, me and my dad in the driveway, holding a fishing rod, both of us squinting into the sun. I was maybe 10. Dad's hand rested on my shoulder like I was something worth protecting. My throat tightened. I closed the album gently. "I'd like one of his old flannel shirts," I said. "Just one." Claire scoffed. "Seriously? It's a shirt," I said. "Unless you're planning to probate his wardrobe too." Mark laughed under his breath. But it wasn't amused. It was contempt. My mom hesitated, then went to the bedroom and returned with a folded flannel, blue and gray. It still smelled faintly like Dad's aftershave and sawdust. I held it like it might disappear. As I turned to leave, I said quietly, "Who's the attorney?" My mom's jaw clenched. "Ethan, don't." Claire stepped forward. "Stop harassing Mom." "I'm not harassing anyone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm an heir. I'm listed in the probate file. You used my old address. You told me there was a will, but you filed intestate. Those are facts. Who is the attorney?" Silence. Then my mom said, "We're using a firm in town. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," I said. Claire moved closer, lowering her voice like she was doing me a favor. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home. You're going to stop digging. And you're going to let Mom grieve without turning this into some conspiracy. Dad didn't leave you anything. That's the end." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time I noticed something I'd ignored my whole life. Claire wasn't sad. She wasn't even stressed. She was protective, like someone guarding a prize. I said, "Then prove it." Mark snorted again. "You want proof? Go hire a lawyer and waste your money." "I already talked to one," I said, and watched their faces tighten just slightly. That tiny reaction was the most honest thing I'd gotten from them in months. I left with the album and the flannel shirt, but I also left with something else. Certainty. They were hiding something, and it wasn't just Mom deserves the house. It was bigger than that. That night I checked the probate portal again. No new documents, no inventory, but I knew now that silence didn't mean nothing was happening. It meant things were happening where I couldn't see them yet. So I did the only thing I could do. I waited, and I watched the file like it was a heartbeat monitor. Because sooner or later, they would have to submit the inventory. And when they did, whatever they'd been trying to keep out of sight would finally have to touch paper. The next few weeks taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier in life. Waiting is not passive when you're paying attention. Every morning before work, I'd log into the county portal and check the docket. Every evening, I'd do it again. I kept the case number pinned in a note on my phone like it was a passcode to a locked room. Nothing. Just the same documents sitting there unchanged. No inventory. no accounting, no amended filings. At first I told myself maybe my mom was slow because she was grieving, but then I remembered how fast she filed the initial petition, how quickly she and Claire moved when they thought no one was watching. They weren't slow, they were selective. After about a month of silence, I got a piece of mail that made my stomach drop. A notice to creditors publication copy, addressed to my old apartment, the same wrong address from the court filing forwarded to me by the post office. It was a clean, simple announcement saying the estate was open and creditors had a certain number of days to make claims. That meant the wrong address wasn't a typo. It was a consistent choice. And the fact that it was still reaching me through forwarding meant their plan wasn't airtight, but it also meant they were comfortable gambling that I wouldn't notice. I sat at my kitchen table holding that notice, hearing Daniel's voice in my head. Keep a timeline, keep records. Don't rely on phone calls. So I stopped trying to talk things out like this was a misunderstanding, and I started treating it like what it was, a process. That afternoon, I emailed Daniel Sue and asked if he could draft a formal letter to the personal representative, my mother, requesting information and confirming my address for service. His response was short. Yes, send me your address and the case number. We'll keep it factual. 2 days later, he sent me a PDF. It was polite, firm, and cold in the best possible way. It stated I was an heir. It noted the address discrepancy. It requested copies of any estate inventories, account statements, and proposed distributions. It asked that all notices be served to my current address going forward. Reading it felt like stepping into a suit of armor I didn't know I was allowed to wear. Daniel mailed it certified, and because my family couldn't control the mail, they couldn't pretend it didn't exist. 3 days after the letter was delivered, my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it because I knew if I answered, the conversation would turn into emotion and blame and guilt, and none of that would change what was filed with the court. A minute later, Claire texted me. Unbelievable. You really hired a lawyer. You're disgusting. I stared at that word, disgusting, and felt something inside me settle, like a door quietly closing. I replied, all I asked for was transparency. Her response came fast. You're trying to take Mom's house. Dad would be ashamed. The funny thing about that line is how clearly it revealed her strategy. Speak for Dad, claim the moral high ground, make me the villain. It didn't matter what the law said, or what the documents showed. It only mattered that she could frame the story before anyone else did. I didn't respond. That weekend, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there with her purse clenched in both hands, like she needed something to hold on to. She looked older than she had at the funeral. Not just grief older, worn older. The kind of aging that comes from stress and sleepless nights. For a split second, I almost felt guilty. Almost. Then I remembered her hand on that envelope. Her refusal to give me a case number. The wrong address. She didn't come to my door because she missed me. She came because she'd lost control of the narrative. Ethan, she said, eyes glossy. Why are you doing this to me? I kept my voice level. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm asking to be included in my father's estate process. That's it. Her mouth tightened. Your sister said you're trying to force a sale of the house. I never said that, I replied. She took a breath, and for a moment she looked like she might actually tell the truth. Then her face hardened into something familiar. Your father wanted me taken care of, she said. He told me. Then why did you file intestate? I asked. Why did you tell me there was a will? Her eyes flickered. Because it's easier to explain it that way. Ethan, this is complicated. There's that word again, I said. Complicated. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like this was a secret between us. If you push this, you will destroy this family. I almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. You destroyed it the day you looked at me and said Dad left me nothing. I said quietly, you didn't even give me a chance to grieve him without turning it into a power play. Her eyes flashed with anger. How dare you? Tell me the truth, I cut in, still calm. Did Dad have a will? She hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. I said, did you ever see one? My mom's throat moved, like she was swallowing something sharp. Claire handled the paperwork. That was new. All this time they'd acted like my mom was the one in charge, but now she was pushing it onto Claire. I held onto that detail like a thread. Did you sign anything you didn't read? I asked. Her cheeks flushed. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. I'm not, I said. I'm treating this like something people can manipulate. My mom shook her head. You've always been suspicious. Always. Your father used to say you overthink everything. I felt my jaw tighten. Dad also used to say I was the only one who paid attention. Her expression changed again. Something like panic, quickly hidden. She took a step back and lifted her chin. I'm done talking about this. If you want to play lawyer games, talk to the attorney. But Claire and I are not going to let you bully us. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway with my hands shaking. Not from fear, from the sick realization that my mother might not even fully understand what Claire was doing. That possibility made everything worse. Because if Claire had control of the paperwork and my mom was just signing where she was told, then the fight wasn't going to be a straightforward mom versus me. It was going to be Claire using mom as a shield, and Mark, of course, as muscle. A week later, Daniel called me. I got a response, he said. My stomach tightened. From my mom. From the estate attorney, he replied. They're refusing to provide documents informally. They claim the estate is minimal and that you've already been advised there's no distribution planned for you. They also stated that any further request should go through the court. I exhaled through my nose. So they're doubling down? Yes, Daniel said. Which is not ideal for them, because now there's a paper trail of refusal. What do we do? I asked. Daniel paused. We can file a request with the court for an accounting, and we can formally enter you as an interested party with corrected address. But before we escalate, I want you to answer a question honestly. Are you prepared for what this will do to your relationship with your mother? I stared at the wall, at the faint scuff marks near the baseboard I'd been meaning to clean for months. I don't think I have that relationship anymore, I said. Daniel's voice stayed steady. Okay, then we proceed. He filed the notice of appearance and a request to ensure I received future filings at my current address. It wasn't a nuclear move, it was administrative, but it was a line in the sand. The next time I checked the portal, there it was. Notice of address for service. Interested party. Seeing my name on the docket again properly, officially, did something to me I didn't expect. It didn't make me happy. It made me feel less invisible. A few days after that filing appeared, Claire sent me an email. Not a text. An email longer, more formal. The kind of message people write when they want to sound calm while threatening you. Ethan, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you are causing Mom severe distress. Dad's estate is straightforward. There is nothing for you. Any attempt to interfere will be seen as harassment and we will respond accordingly. It ended with, please stop. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Daniel. He replied with a single line, do not respond. So I didn't. Instead, I focused on what mattered, figuring out what assets existed and what might be missing. I started with the simplest piece, my dad's truck. He had a 2016 Ford F-150, dark gray, always clean. I knew the VIN was in his insurance paperwork, which I didn't have, but I also knew the license plate because I'd helped him renew it once. I ran a basic title check through a paid service and confirmed it was in his name alone, not joint with my mom. That meant it should be part of the estate. Yet the probate file still had no inventory listing it. Then I thought about his bank accounts. Dad had always been old school. He liked having a personal account separate from household spending. He'd mentioned it in conversation once when I teased him about balancing a checkbook like it was 1985. He also had a safe. Not a bank safe deposit box, an actual metal safe in his home office closet. I remembered it because once, years ago, he'd asked me to help move it when he rearranged the office, and I'd almost thrown my back out. The office, the room Claire forbade me from entering. I kept turning that over in my mind. Why the office? Why the garage? Why the intensity? And then I remembered something that made my skin prickle. About a year before my dad died, we'd had a rare moment, just the two of us, when my mom and Claire were out at some school event with Claire's kids. Dad and I were in the garage, tinkering with a broken leaf blower. He'd been quiet for a while, then he said, almost casually, if anything ever happens to me, don't let anyone rush you. I'd looked up from the engine and said, what are you talking about? He wiped his hands on a rag, eyes not quite meeting mine. I'm just saying, people get weird, families get weird, money makes people show themselves. I laughed then, because it felt dramatic. Dad, we're not the Rockefellers. He didn't laugh back. He said, promise me you'll pay attention. I'd promised, mostly to stop the conversation from getting heavy. Now, months later, I could hear his voice like it was in the garage with me again. Don't let anyone rush you. Pay attention. So I did something that felt both ridiculous and necessary. I went back through my phone and looked at every text exchange I'd had with Dad in the last 2 years. Most of it was boring. How's work? Need anything from the store? Happy birthday, kiddo. But then I found a message from 6 months before he died. I'd texted him, "Did you ever find that key you mentioned?" He replied, "Yep, in the blue toolbox. Don't worry about it." At the time, I hadn't thought twice. Now I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse pick up. What key? I couldn't remember what he was referring to, and that bothered me. Dad didn't lose keys often, and he didn't sound casual when he did. The blue toolbox was in the garage. The garage Claire said I couldn't enter. I realized my mind was starting to do what it always does under stress: connect dots, build theories, spiral. So I forced myself back to reality. A key doesn't matter without proof. An inventory does, and the inventory was overdue. By the next month, even I, an IT guy, not a lawyer, could see the timeline didn't look normal. The estate had been open long enough that there should have been a formal list of assets filed. Either they were delaying or they were trying to keep assets out of probate entirely. Daniel suggested we file a motion to compel an inventory. When he said the word compel, I felt a twist in my stomach. "Does that mean court?" I asked. "It can," he said. "Often it just means the personal representative suddenly remembers their obligations." So we filed it. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No judge banging a gavel. Just documents, a request, a reference to statutory duties, a deadline. And then, 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 9:13 p.m. It was Mark. I stared at his name on the screen like it was a snake. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail. His voice was low and angry. "Ethan, you need to back off. You hear me? You're messing with things you don't understand. Mom's health is suffering because of you. If you keep pushing this, there will be consequences." Consequences. I saved the voicemail and emailed it to Daniel. Daniel called me the next morning. "Do not engage with him," he said. "And if he shows up, you call the police." I'm serious. Hearing an attorney say that about my brother-in-law, about my family, made my stomach turn. But it also confirmed we were close to something. People don't threaten you over nothing. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I refreshed the probate portal and saw a new entry. Inventory of Decedent's estate. Filed. My heart actually stuttered. I clicked so fast my hand slipped on the mouse. The document list loaded, and for a second the file wouldn't open. The spinning icon sat there like it was mocking me. I tried again. It opened. I stared at the first page, seeing my mother's name, the case number, the title in bold letters. Inventory. My eyes scanned down, hungry and terrified at the same time, because this was the moment where reality would finally be forced onto paper. This was the moment where either I would find out my father truly left almost nothing, or I would find out exactly what my family was trying to keep from me. And as I scrolled toward the itemized list, my mouth went dry, because I saw the layout, the categories, the blank lines waiting to be filled, and I knew that somewhere on that page was going to be the detail that changed everything. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the courthouse, not trusting my own eyes through a blurry PDF, needing to see it printed, official, undeniable. By the time I sat down at the public computer again, my hands were shaking. I clicked the inventory file once more, leaned closer to the screen, and began reading the listed items line by line. I sat down at the courthouse computer like it was a confession booth, except the only thing I was confessing was that I'd been naive enough to think grief would make people kinder. The inventory was formatted exactly the way Daniel had described. Categories, item numbers, estimated values, short descriptions that felt insulting in how they flattened a person's life into bullet points. I started reading from the top, forcing myself to go slowly. Household furnishings, minimal, a few $100s. Tools, a number that was laughably low, like someone had looked at my dad's garage and decided a lifetime of equipment was worth the same as a used microwave. Vehicles, one entry that made my jaw tighten. His truck was listed, but the value was pushed down to the lowest reasonable estimate, like they were trying to make the entire estate look small on paper. Bank accounts, one joint checking account with my mom. No mention of a personal account. No mention of a safe. No mention of anything that would explain why Claire had been acting like a guard dog for months. I felt that familiar surge of anger, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for details. I kept scrolling, and then I saw it. It was a single-line item in the other property/miscellaneous section. A short description, a bank name, a box number, and then right there in black and white words that made my vision sharpen like someone had snapped a camera into focus. Safe deposit box #218, First Piedmont Bank, Co-Lacey, Ethan Caldwell. My name, not in the heirs list, not as a child, Not as someone who was supposed to sit quietly and accept scraps, as a named co-Lacey on a safe deposit box. For a second, I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, rereading the line like it might rearrange itself into something less explosive if I looked long enough. It didn't. My name was on that inventory under a specific item, and it wasn't a sentimental gesture like a flannel shirt or a photo album. It was a bank safe deposit box. Something official, something planned, and something my family had never mentioned once. My hands went cold. I scrolled up and down a few lines, checking if it was a mistake, if perhaps the clerk had auto-filled my name or I was misreading it. But it was there again when I scrolled back. Co-Lessee, Ethan Caldwell. A wave of emotion came over me so fast it almost knocked the air out of my lungs. Not just anger, not just relief. It was the deep unsettling feeling of realizing my father had been doing something quietly in the background, and he'd chosen me to be part of it. I printed the inventory page, then I printed the cover page, then I printed the signature page, where my mother swore under oath that the list was true and complete to the best of her knowledge, because if she'd sworn this was accurate, then she couldn't later pretend she forgot a safe deposit box existed. I left the courthouse with those pages clutched in my hand like they were a life raft. In my car, I called Daniel immediately. He picked up on the second ring. "Any update?" "I found something," I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. Tight, controlled, like I was holding a lid down on boiling water. The probate inventory lists a safe deposit box at First Piedmont Bank, and it says I'm a co-Lessee. There was a brief pause on the line. Not surprise exactly. More like the pause of a man assembling a legal framework in his head. "That's significant," he said. "Do you have a copy?" "I printed it," I replied. "What does it mean?" "It can mean a few things," Daniel said. "If you're a co-Lessee, you may have legal access independent of the estate. Banks have their own policies, but co-Lessee status usually isn't accidental." "Would my mom have known?" I asked. "Hard to say," he said carefully. "But if it's listed on the inventory, she knows now. And if she listed it, either she's trying to comply under pressure, or she's trying to control the story before you get to it." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "So what do I do?" "Go to the bank," Daniel said. "Today if you can. Bring your ID. Bring a copy of the inventory, and the death certificate if you have it. If you don't have the death certificate, we can request one, but the bank may require it. Most importantly, do not go alone if you feel unsafe, and do not tell your family until after you've secured whatever's inside." I stared through the windshield at the gray sky. "You think they'll try to stop me?" "I think they've been trying to stop you for months," Daniel replied. "This may be the reason." When I got home, I looked through the folder of funeral documents I'd shoved into a drawer and forgotten. In that pile, I found a certified copy of the death certificate that my mom had handed me early on in case you need it for anything. At the time, it felt like a token. Now it felt like a mistake she wished she could undo. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying one question over and over. Why would my dad put my name on a safe deposit box? Because people don't do that casually. They do it when they're protecting something, when they're making sure the right person can access it. And if my dad was protecting something, then someone in my family had a reason to fear what was inside. The next morning, I drove to First Piedmont Bank. It was a clean brick building with a polished lobby and that quiet, muffled atmosphere banks always have, as if sound costs money. I walked in with my folder of documents under my arm and my heart beat loud in my ears. A woman at the front desk smiled politely. "How can I help you?" "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, and even that sentence felt surreal, like I was playing a role I hadn't auditioned for. "Do you have the box number?" she asked. I opened my folder and slid the printed inventory page forward. Box 218. My name should be listed as a co-Lessee. Ethan Caldwell. Her smile softened into something neutral. "Okay. Let me verify your identity. Can I see a driver's license?" I handed it over. She typed, clicked, typed again. Then she looked up at me. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. You are listed as a co-Lessee on safe deposit box 218. The words hit me like a physical shove. Not beneficiary. Not heir. Co-Lessee. Equal access. The bank employee said, "Will you be accessing the box alone today?" "Yes," I said, then hesitated. "My father is deceased. Do you need documentation?" "We'll need a copy of the death certificate for our records," she said gently. "But since you're a co-Lessee, you do not need court authorization to access the box." I felt my throat tighten. So my mother can't block me. She gave me a careful professional look. Not if you are an authorized co-Lacey, no. I nodded, trying to keep my face calm, but inside I felt something like vindication rising up, sharp and painful. All those weeks of being told there's nothing for you. All those times Claire acted like I was delusional. And here I was, being told by a bank employee, in a building full of strangers, that I had legal access to something my father deliberately tied to my name. The woman led me down a hallway to the vault area. It wasn't dramatic like in movies, just a secure door, cameras, and a quiet room lined with metal boxes. Another employee joined us. Procedures, paperwork, signatures. Then they brought out a metal box and placed it in a small private viewing room with a table, like they were handing me a piece of someone else's life. The employee said, "I'll step outside. Just knock when you're done." The door closed. The room went silent. I stared at the box on the table. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a thick shoebox. Ordinary metal. No markings, but it felt heavy in a different way. Not physically, but emotionally. I slid the key into the lock. My hand trembled, and I hated that it did. Not because I was scared of what I'd find, but because I was scared of what it would mean. I turned the key. The lock clicked. I lifted the lid. Inside were a few neatly arranged items, not stuffed randomly like a junk drawer, but organized like my dad had packed it with intention. The first thing I saw was a manila envelope, sealed, with my name written across the front in my father's handwriting. Ethan. Big, careful letters. The same handwriting that had labeled the drawers in his workshop. The same handwriting that used to leave me notes on the kitchen counter when I was a teenager. I touched the envelope with the tip of my finger like it might burn. Under the envelope was a small black USB drive. Next to that, a thin folder with bank letterhead. And beneath those, another envelope, unmarked, but thicker, as if it held multiple pages. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the room was pulsing with it. This wasn't just Dad's private documents. This was a package, a message. And suddenly I understood why Claire had been so obsessed with keeping me out of the office and the garage. Why my mom's hand had pressed down on that envelope at the dining table like she could physically keep the truth contained. Because my dad hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me something that required my name to unlock. I picked up the envelope with my name on it. The paper was smooth, high quality, like he'd bought it intentionally. The flap was sealed tight. I hesitated, breathing shallowly. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, sharp and intrusive in the silence. I pulled it out and saw Claire's name. For a second I just stared at it, my stomach twisting. How did she know I was here? Had she been watching the docket and guessing? Had my mother told her? Or had she followed me? The phone buzzed again, and again. I didn't answer. I turned it to silent and set it face down on the table. My hands went back to the envelope, and I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter, folded once, and a single page clipped behind it. I unfolded the letter first. The first line made my vision blur instantly. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and they told you I left you nothing." My breath caught. My dad had predicted it. He'd known exactly what would happen. I read the next line, my hands shaking harder now. "I'm sorry you had to hear it from them, but I needed you to hear the truth from me." I pressed the heel of my hand into my eye for a second, trying to stop the sting. My dad felt suddenly close, like his voice was in the room with me. I kept reading, but the words started coming too fast, each sentence opening another door in my mind. He wrote that he'd watched the way Claire and my mother handled money for years, that he'd seen missing amounts, unexplained withdrawals, credit cards opened and paid off without clear reasons. He wrote that he didn't want to spend his last years in a war inside his own home, but he also refused to let his life's work be rewritten after his death. Then I saw the sentence that made my stomach drop into a cold, hard knot. "I put your name on this box because I didn't trust anyone else to leave it alone." I swallowed, forcing myself to keep reading. He referenced the document behind this letter and the USB drive. He told me to take copies. He told me to speak to an attorney before confronting anyone. He told me, in the calm, steady way my dad always spoke when he wanted me to listen, not to let them rush me. And then, near the bottom of the page, he wrote one line that felt like my father reaching through time and grabbing my shoulder the way he did when I was 10 years old. "You were never the problem, son. You were the one I could trust." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, then looked at the page clipped behind the letter, the one he'd clearly meant as proof, not just comfort. It was a bank document, a record of a separate account, my dad's personal account, showing multiple withdrawals over the last 2 years, each one signed off with a power of attorney authorization, and the name on the authorization wasn't my mother's. It was Claire's. I stared at it until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like something else. Like motive. Like a timeline of theft. My phone buzzed again, still face down on the table, vibrating like a trapped insect. This time it stopped, then started again. Persistent, urgent. I didn't pick it up, because in that moment I realized something with a clarity that made me feel sick and calm at the same time. Claire hadn't just lied about my inheritance. She'd been managing the story for a long time, maybe even before my dad died. And now that I'd opened the box, she knew the story was about to collapse. I reached for the black USB drive next, holding it between my fingers. My dad had gone beyond letters, beyond warnings. He had saved something digital, emails, scans, records, something that couldn't be misremembered or smoothed over with tears. I packed everything back into the box carefully, leaving the envelopes and documents exactly as I'd found them, and then I closed the lid. Not because I was done, because I suddenly understood I wasn't safe to process this alone in a bank room with my phone lighting up with Claire's name. I needed Daniel. I needed copies. I needed a plan. I took the envelope with my name on it, the bank document, and the USB drive, only the items clearly meant for me, and I locked the box again. When I stepped out and handed the employee the box, my hands looked steadier than I felt. I walked through the lobby, out into the rainy parking lot, and sat in my car for a long moment without starting the engine. The letter was on the passenger seat. My dad's handwriting faced up at me like an accusation and an anchor. And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel lost. I felt directed, because now I knew what the one item under my name really was. It wasn't a trinket. It was a vault my father built for the truth. And judging by how desperately Claire was calling me, she already understood exactly what it contained. I started the car and drove straight to Daniel's office with the wipers thumping like a metronome, trying to keep my breathing steady while my mind replayed my dad's letter on a loop. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and they told you I left you nothing. Even in death, Dad had been ahead of them. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw 3 missed calls and 5 unread texts from Claire. The last one just said, "Call me now. This is serious." I didn't respond. I walked into Daniel's office carrying the envelope and the USB drive like they were fragile evidence from a crime scene, which in a way they were. Daniel took one look at my face and said, "You got into the box." "I did," I said, voice tight, "and my dad wrote a letter. He knew they'd say I got nothing. He put my name on the box because he didn't trust anyone else." Daniel held out his hand. "Let me see what you brought." I handed him the letter first. He read it quietly, eyes moving fast but focused, the way a good attorney reads, absorbing meaning and implications at the same time. When he reached the line about withdrawals and Claire's authorization, he stopped and looked up. "Do you have the bank record you mentioned?" he asked. I slid it over. Daniel stared at the page, then exhaled. "Okay." That single word sounded heavier than any speech. Then I handed him the USB drive. He nodded once. "We're going to make copies of everything and preserve the chain. Then we're going to decide the cleanest legal route." I sat down, palms pressed to my knees to stop them from shaking. Daniel called his assistant and asked her to bring in a laptop that wasn't connected to their network, plus a USB write blocker. I didn't even know what a write blocker was, but when he explained it, something that prevents changes to the data, I felt an unexpected wave of relief. This was being treated like evidence, not a family misunderstanding. They plugged the drive in carefully, and within a minute the screen filled with folders, organized, labeled, dated. My dad had done this like a man building a case. One folder was titled Bank Statements, Personal, another POA Documents, another Emails, and the one that made my stomach turn, If They Lie. Daniel clicked that one first. Inside were scanned copies of documents, my dad's power of attorney paperwork, and then a second document labeled Revocation of Power of Attorney, signed and notarized nearly 8 months before he died. Daniel's finger hovered over the date. "They shouldn't have been using POA after this," he said quietly. I stared at the screen, "But the bank record in the box, those withdrawals are after that date." Daniel nodded. "Which means either the bank never received the revocation or someone kept using the authority anyway." He opened the email folder next, and suddenly my chest tightened so hard it hurt. There were emails between Claire and a bank representative. Not dozens, just enough. Clear enough. One of them was a confirmation. "As discussed, we can continue to process the requested transfers under the existing POA on file." Another was Claire. Please expedite. Dad's health is declining and we need to get Mom positioned. Positioned, Daniel repeated out loud, his voice flat with disbelief. I felt a cold wave run through me. She was moving money while he was alive. Daniel kept clicking. More statements, more transfers, cashier's checks, payments to a credit card that wasn't in my dad's name. Then Daniel opened a PDF that looked like a clean list of amounts with dates, my dad's own summary, typed, not handwritten. At the bottom he'd written, total, $96,430. I swallowed hard, almost $100,000. Daniel didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on the numbers. Enough to matter, enough to be criminal, depending on circumstances, and enough to motivate someone to keep you away from the file. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like my father had been in a silent war while I was living my normal life, fixing printers and resetting passwords, thinking our family dysfunction was just emotional. It wasn't just emotional. It was financial. It was systematic. Daniel opened one more file, and my breath caught. A scanned letter addressed to the estate attorney. Unsigned, undated, but written in my dad's voice. A draft, like something he'd prepared in case he didn't get the chance to deliver it. It said in plain language that he wanted any improper transfers investigated, that Claire was not to act for him, and that if he died without a will filed, it was not because he wanted his son excluded. Daniel leaned back and finally looked at me. Ethan, he said, your father anticipated this. He built you a roadmap. My throat tightened. So what happens now? Daniel steepled his fingers. Now we stop trying to get cooperation. We go to court. The next 2 weeks moved faster than the months before them. Daniel filed a petition with the probate court requesting an order for a full accounting and a request to restrict the personal representative's authority until the discrepancies were resolved. He asked for subpoenas to the bank for records related to the personal account and the safe deposit box access logs. We included the inventory line showing my name as Coles, and we attached the evidence from the USB drive. For the first time, the story wasn't Ethan is paranoid. The story was, there are documented transfers and conflicting authority dates. When the court hearing date came, I didn't tell my family. I didn't need to. They got served, and Claire's behavior changed overnight. She stopped texting me threats and started texting me offers. First it was, let's talk like adults. Then we can work something out without court. Then Mom is going to have a breakdown because of you. Then finally, Dad wanted you to have sentimental things, not money. You're twisting this. Every message was the same strategy, repackaged. Make me feel cruel, make me feel greedy, make me feel like the villain. But now I had my father's words in my pocket and his files on a legal drive in Daniel's office. So for the first time in my life, I didn't argue with Claire. I let the process answer her. On the day of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom and watched my mother enter with Claire and Mark. My mom looked smaller than I remembered. She clutched her purse like it was an anchor. Claire looked the same as always, composed, chin lifted, eyes scanning the room like she was assessing how much control she still had. Mark looked furious, jaw clenched, like he wanted to make the whole room afraid of him. When Claire saw me, her face tightened, but she forced a smile and whispered something to my mom. My mom looked at me with a mix of anger and something else, fear, maybe, or confusion. When the judge came in, everything got quiet in that specific way courtrooms do, where even breathing sounds like it's happening too loudly. Daniel stood and spoke calmly, walking the judge through the basics: intestate filing, inventory filed under pressure, safe deposit box listed with co-lessee status, delayed inventory, and then the evidence suggesting misuse of power of attorney after a revocation date. Claire's attorney objected to several points. The judge listened, asked questions, looked down at the printed documents. Then the judge asked my mother a direct question. Mrs. Caldwell, are you aware of these transfers? My mom's face went pale. I don't know what those are. The judge turned slightly. Who was handling your late husband's finances in the last year of his life? My mom glanced at Claire like she was searching for the answer. That glance told the truth before anyone spoke. My mother said, Claire helped. She said she was taking care of things. Claire's attorney tried to intervene, but the judge held up a hand. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge said, did you authorize your daughter to use power of attorney on your husband's accounts after he revoked it? My mother's mouth opened, then closed. No, she whispered. Claire's head snapped toward her. For the first time, her mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but it was there. Shock and anger, fast and sharp. Daniel didn't look triumphant. He just looked steady, like a man letting facts do what facts do. The judge ordered a formal accounting and restricted the personal representative's ability to distribute or dispose of assets until the investigation was complete. The judge also ordered the bank records produced and set another hearing date. Walking out of that courtroom, I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt numb. Because no matter how awful my mother and sister had been to me, seeing my mom look genuinely lost, like she was realizing she'd been used too, felt like watching a different kind of death. In the hallway, Claire came at me fast. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice low. "You just had to be dramatic." Daniel stepped between us immediately. "Do not speak to my client." Mark moved like he might shove past him, and a bailiff looked over. Mark stopped. Claire grabbed his arm hard, like she was physically restraining him from making the situation worse. My mom stood behind them, staring at the floor, breathing in short, shaky pulls. I looked at her and said quietly, "Mom, I didn't want this. I wanted honesty." She didn't answer. Claire snapped, "Don't pretend you care now." Daniel guided me away, and we left. Over the next month, the bank's response came in, and it hit like a hammer. The bank confirmed the revocation document existed in their records, but it had been submitted late, after several of the larger transfers were already processed. There were also irregularities, requests made by Claire that weren't typical, expedited actions, and a set of transactions that required additional review. Daniel explained it to me in plain terms. The bank wasn't admitting fault, but they weren't protecting Claire either. The court-appointed accounting painted the rest of the picture. My dad's personal account had been drained down repeatedly. Claire had used the money to pay off her own credit cards, cover part of a home renovation, and this was the part that made my stomach twist, make gifts to my mother that were framed as my dad's generosity. She'd been buying loyalty with my father's money, and then after he died, she'd tried to make sure no one looked closely enough to ask where that money went. The safe deposit box wasn't just a stash. It was my dad's insurance policy against being rewritten. At the second hearing, the judge didn't yell. Judges don't need to yell. The judge simply laid out the findings, asked Claire's attorney if they disputed the authenticity of the documents from the USB drive, and when they couldn't, the tone of the room changed. Claire stopped looking confident. Mark stopped looking dangerous. My mother stopped looking angry and started looking ashamed. The court removed my mother as personal representative, not as a punishment, but because she was clearly not able to independently administer the estate. A neutral administrator was appointed, and then the question became what mattered most to me. What was going to happen to the estate assets, and what was going to happen with the money that had been taken? In the end, it didn't turn into some dramatic Hollywood moment where Claire was marched out in handcuffs. Real life is slower than that. But it did turn into something that mattered more. A settlement was reached under the court's supervision. Claire had to repay a large portion of what she'd taken back into the estate. Some of it came from refinancing, some from liquidating investments, and some, I suspect, came from Mark's pride being forced to swallow reality. The neutral administrator then distributed the estate according to the intestacy rules, and for the first time since my dad died, I saw an official document that didn't erase me, a distribution statement. My name, my share, not nothing, not sentimental items, my father's life, acknowledged in a way my family couldn't smirk away. When the check arrived, I held it in my hands and didn't feel excited. I felt tired. I deposited it and paid off my car. I put a chunk into savings. I set aside money for something I'd been putting off for years, therapy, because I realized I'd spent my whole life learning how to be small around people who made themselves big. And then, after everything, my mother asked to meet me alone. We met at a quiet diner halfway between our homes. She looked fragile, like someone whose reality had cracked and never fully resealed. She didn't apologize right away. She wasn't the kind of person who could jump straight to that. Instead, she said, "I didn't know." I stirred my coffee slowly. "You didn't know anything? Or you didn't want to know?" Her eyes filled. "I didn't want to believe my daughter would." "She did," I said, not cruelly, just plainly. My mom nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "She said you were trying to take everything. She said you hated us." I felt something ache behind my ribs. "I never hated you. I hated being treated like I didn't matter." She covered her mouth with her hand for a moment and whispered, "Your father would be so disappointed." I looked at her, and I surprised myself by saying, "He already knew." She blinked at me. I pulled out a photocopy of the letter, just the first page, and slid it across the table. Not as a weapon, as a truth she needed to see. My mom read the line about them telling me he left me nothing, and her face crumpled. She cried quietly right there in the diner, and I sat across from her realizing something bittersweet. My dad had loved her, but he didn't trust her, and he had loved Claire, but he wasn't blind to who she'd become. He trusted me because I wasn't flashy. I wasn't persuasive. I wasn't the golden child. I was the one who paid attention. My relationship with Claire didn't recover. Maybe that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. After the settlement, she sent one email that said, "I hope you're happy." No apology, no accountability, just that same old framing me as the cause, not the consequence. Mark never contacted me again, and honestly, that was a gift. My relationship with my mother became something different. Not close, not warm, but more honest in its distance. I visit sometimes. I check on her. I bring groceries. I fix things around the house because that's who I am. But I don't let her rewrite history anymore. And I don't let her talk about my dad like he chose to abandon me. Because he didn't. The last thing I did with my share of the estate wasn't something dramatic. I didn't buy anything flashy. I didn't post anything online. I bought a small metal filing cabinet. I put my dad's letter inside it, in a folder labeled Dad. I kept the USB drive in a fireproof bag. And I wrote down the lesson my father spent his final years trying to teach me. Love doesn't excuse blindness. Family doesn't earn automatic trust. And keep the peace is a beautiful phrase that sometimes means let someone harm you quietly. My dad wasn't perfect. He waited too long to confront what was happening. He tried to manage it in the shadows instead of dragging it into the light while he was alive. But he did one thing that changed everything for me. He made sure the truth had a way to reach me. That single-line item in the probate inventory, one item under my name, wasn't just an inheritance. It was my father's last act of protection, and it exposed exactly who had been lying the whole time.